What if the ground shook beneath your feet, and just minutes later, a massive wall of water was racing toward your city? Tsunamis have wiped out entire towns in Japan, Indonesia, and Alaska, and the next one could be even worse. Some individuals may not contemplate the likelihood of a tsunami impacting their residents. However, to evaluate all potential risks, it is essential to understand where and, more importantly, why these destructive waves typically occur. To begin, consult a map of tectonic plates. The Earth's crust consists of platforms that essentially support both continents and the ocean floor. They shift in relation to one another at speeds of up to several centimeters annually. Occasionally, this movement triggers subterranean tremors. These tremors manifest in fault zones where two plates either separate, converge, or slide past one another. Statistics from the past century indicate that 80% of tsunamis have been triggered solely by earthquakes. In the case of Japan, it was the oceanic Pacific plate that subducted beneath the Okhotsk plate. Regarding Turkey, the nation is situated in one of the most seismically active regions globally. The area where this year's earthquake transpired is located at the convergence of three tectonic plates: the Anatolian, Arabian, and African plates. The Arabian plate is advancing northward, exerting pressure on the Anatolian plate, which constitutes the majority of Turkey, causing it to shift westward. Following the earthquake in the Turkish city of Iskender, the sea level began to rise. Numerous videos depict water inundating the streets. While this is not a significant flood, it still presents a rather foreboding sight. If the tremor magnitude had been greater that day, Turkey might have found itself not only reliving the events that impacted Japan in 2011, but also the catastrophic Indian Ocean disaster of 2004. This earthquake, measuring 9.3 on the Richter scale, ranks among the three most intense earthquakes ever recorded, and the tsunami that ensued is the deadliest in human history. On that fateful day, a massive segment of the Indian and Australian tectonic plates ruptured. Rather than a single powerful shock, the earthquake persisted for a full 10 minutes. Consequently, the wave energy generated by the resulting tsunami was equivalent to twice the total energy of all explosives utilized during World War II, including the two atomic bombs. The highest wave recorded that day reached 30 meters, nearly 18 times the height of an average human. Since the disaster occurred on December 26th, it impacted not only the residents of Indonesia, Sri Lanka, southern India, and Thailand, but also numerous tourists who had traveled to warmer destinations for their Christmas holidays. Footage from that day reveals individuals praying for their survival. This mega tsunami claimed approximately 300,000 lives, although the precise death toll remains uncertain, as many victims were swept away into the ocean. Therefore, if you observe your city marked with red dots on a tectonic plate map indicating earthquake risk, exercise caution. The threat of a mega tsunami is exceedingly high. Such catastrophic events can also be triggered by landslides. A significant mass wasting event can displace vast quantities of water in the sea or ocean, leading to a mega tsunami. For instance, in 1958, an earthquake in Latuyoya Bay, Alaska, resulted in a massive fall of ice and rocks from a height of 900 meters. This led to the observation of the largest mega tsunami wave ever recorded. It reached a height of 600 meters, equivalent to 352 times the average height of a person. Such a disaster poses a genuine threat to your city if you reside in any state within the United States. The Appalachian Mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and the coastal ranges of the Pacific Ocean, along with certain regions of Hawaii, are frequently affected by landslides. In essence, any mountain or similar formation near a body of water, whether it be an ocean or a lake, presents a considerable risk. Therefore, it is advisable to consult a physical map of the world that illustrates various types of terrain. Additionally, you should be aware of any volcanoes in your vicinity or nearby. This is due to the fact that volcanic eruptions can have effects similar to those of earthquakes. For example, a powerful tsunami followed the eruption of the Indonesian volcano Krakatoa in 1883, resulting in the destruction of 5,000 ships and the loss of 36,000 lives. However, even if you reside in a flat area devoid of mountains or volcanoes and not situated at any tectonic plate boundaries, it is unwise to feel overly secure. There are several specific factors that can unexpectedly trigger a mega tsunami. These factors include a large meteorite impacting the water or even a nuclear explosion. A tsunami can occur if a bomb detonates underwater or near the coastline. The resulting wave will radiate in all directions from the explosion's epicenter, potentially causing extensive damage to coastal regions. In summary, no one is entirely safe. Now, let us examine the likelihood of surviving a tsunami. We will begin with the least likely yet most perilous scenarios. If any celestial object were to fall into the ocean, any efforts to escape the aftermath would likely be futile. In fact, a similar event has occurred in the past, resulting in catastrophic consequences for Earth and all living beings. Researchers have determined that approximately 66 million years ago, our planet experienced a collision with an asteroid. Evidence of this event is evident in Chicxul, a massive crater measuring around 14 kilometers in diameter located on the Yucatan Peninsula. The tsunamis recorded in contemporary times are insignificant compared to that global disaster. The impact generated a wave reaching 100 meters in height, which is 59 times the average height of a human being. Furthermore, the tsunami's intensity was comparable not just to 2 or 3, but an astonishing 30,000 earthquakes that occurred in the Indian Ocean in 2004. Many dinosaurs that existed during that period perished by drowning. However, the consequences did not end there. The impact moment initiated the release of substantial amounts of gases and soot, resulting in a cooling of the Earth to 25 degrees Celsius, a temperature that persisted for several decades. As a result, vegetation began to die off, leading to starvation among the remaining dinosaurs. Should a similar event occur in the future, humanity would face another ice age, potentially leading to our extinction as a species. This implies that our chances of survival would be exceedingly slim. The projections become even more alarming when considering a hypothetical tsunami triggered by a nuclear explosion. A nuclear device with a yield of 200 megatons would generate a wave towering 294 times higher than an average person. This surpasses even the prehistoric wave that contributed to the demise of the dinosaurs. The most concerning aspect is that while natural disasters can at least be predicted to some extent, the actions of a leader in a nuclear-armed nation pressing the infamous button cannot be foreseen. Thus, if your nation finds itself at the center of a conflict involving nuclear powers, your likelihood of survival would be exceedingly low in such a scenario. At first glance, a landslide scenario may appear less perilous due to the presence of various indicators that it is about to occur. Initially, one can observe the trees, which will not remain upright as they typically do, but will instead lean at an angle. Constructing walls will similarly be inclined and fractured, while poles will be misaligned, pulling down power lines. Additionally, it is crucial to monitor any fluctuations in water levels within wells or other storage facilities. Although even specialists may sometimes fail to predict disastrous outcomes, such as those that occurred in Italy in 1963. On October 9th, a massive landslide consisting of dirt and rocks cascaded from Monte Toc Mountain into the nearby reservoir formed by the Vant Dam at a velocity of approximately 100 kilometers per hour. The collision generated a wave of no less than 50 million cubic meters, rising to a height of 91 meters above the dam's level, sweeping away everything in its path. The personnel residing in the vicinity were killed instantly. Subsequently, the waves surged into the Pave River, effectively consuming the town of Longeron and erasing it from existence. 2,000 of its inhabitants lost their lives. Ultimately, the tsunami reached San Martino, claiming hundreds more. Following the disaster, Mario Pancini, the engineer responsible for the dam's construction, was called to testify in court, but he took his own life prior to his scheduled appearance. As illustrated, situations become increasingly complex when human error is involved. This indicates that your likelihood of survival does not solely rely on your actions. However, what measures would you take to protect yourself from a tsunami if you experienced an earthquake? For instance, in Japan, such events are relatively common. After all, the disaster of 2011 was not the sole tragedy in the nation's past. In 1993, a colossal wave triggered by an underwater earthquake engulfed the island of Okushiri. This was the most significant tsunami recorded in Japan's history. The wave reached heights of 30 meters, equivalent to 17.5 times the height of an average person. Despite local authorities' efforts to mitigate the tsunami with specialized barriers and issuing evacuation orders, the natural disaster claimed over 200 lives, nearly wiping out the entire population of the small town. And here we stand. Recently, in 2022, Japan experienced another significant earthquake, measuring 7.4 on the Richter scale. This was succeeded by a tsunami wave that surged towards Fukushima, reaching a height of 30 meters once more. However, the Japanese population had learned from their previous hardships. They established an advanced early warning system for both earthquakes and tsunamis, utilizing data from 4,235 seismometers distributed throughout the country. The government issued timely warnings for residents to avoid the coastline, which ultimately saved numerous lives. Although the natural disaster resulted in 3 fatalities, the toll could have been considerably higher without the early warning system in place. In summary, it is challenging to assess one's chances of survival during a tsunami triggered by an earthquake, as such disasters are unavoidable. However, precautions can be taken to mitigate risks. This responsibility primarily falls on local authorities, whose accountability remains questionable. On January 23, 2018, at 12:30 a.m., the Tsunami and Earthquake Warning System detected underground tremors in the Gulf of Alaska, estimating a magnitude of 7.9. Given that earthquakes of this scale typically generate massive waves, the authorities promptly notified residents along the Alaskan coast about the potential threat. Moments later, the terrified residents were scrambling to find safe locations, desperately searching for the nearest hill, only to discover it was a false alarm. Fortunately, the instruments had miscalculated. Currently, only 5 nations possess cutting-edge global tsunami warning systems: the USA, Australia, Chile, India, and, as previously mentioned, Japan. However, as you have just discovered, these systems cannot be relied upon completely. It is true that one of them inaccurately predicted that Alaska was in severe danger, which ultimately did not occur, yet the instruments could just as easily overlook a genuine tsunami. In the vast ocean, waves travel at remarkable speeds, enabling warnings to reach distant coastal areas a few hours prior to a catastrophe. Conversely, coastal regions situated near the epicenter of an earthquake that triggers a tsunami may experience flooding within minutes. Emergency managers along the coastline must make critical evacuation decisions in a matter of seconds. Furthermore, the evacuation process itself can take between 3 to 4 hours. This indicates that nations at risk must have a contingency plan to alleviate the dangers of a disaster. For instance, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology conducted nearly 2,000 tsunami simulations to develop a series of template scenarios that outline the possible effects of tsunamis generated by earthquakes of varying magnitudes and locations. Nevertheless, even with the most effective strategies, nature can be erratic and astonishing. For instance, approximately 100 tsunami evacuation centers in the Japanese city of Sai were compromised by a massive wave in 2011, rendering them ineffective. When a wave is poised to engulf you, escaping it becomes exceedingly difficult. Therefore, it is essential to devise your tsunami emergency plan in advance. Japan has already constructed tsunami barriers in several coastal towns. Additionally, children are taught from a young age to recognize the tremors of the ground and how to respond in the event of a disaster. Japan has also reassessed its construction regulations. Due to the inherent brittleness of concrete, which is prone to breaking, the Japanese have transitioned to utilizing ductile concrete structures. Steel reinforcements are integrated within columns and walls. This, along with various other construction techniques, will enable Japan to endure earthquakes and tsunamis with reduced damage, a statement that cannot be made regarding Turkey. It has been discovered that the primary reason for numerous fatalities was not solely the natural disaster itself, but rather the construction of substandard housing. For example, the cities of Nurdigay and Erzin are situated in southwestern Turkey, in close proximity to one another, and both were positioned at the epicenter of the earthquake. However, Nurdigay was completely leveled and must be rebuilt from the ground up, whereas Erzin experienced no structural collapses and no casualties. It was found that Mayor Okish Elisoglu had imposed a ban on any illegal construction within the city. Consequently, all buildings in Erzin adhere strictly to safety regulations. But what about the remainder of Turkey? If the country is unprepared for earthquakes, even a minor tsunami could lead to even more disastrous outcomes. The issue indeed presents numerous solutions. In fact, you can contribute to your country's preparedness for natural disasters. All that is required is to activate your PlayStation. Commissioned by security ministries globally, specialized task forces allocate substantial funds towards the development, testing, and implementation of anti-tsunami protective measures. However, concurrently, various options for infrastructure enhancement are readily accessible for individuals to experiment with in the city-building simulation game Cities, Skylines, created by the Finnish development team Colossal Order. The primary goal for players is to construct their own environmentally friendly and secure city. This objective can be accomplished through careful planning of development zones, strategic road placement, and the effective management of utility services and public transportation. The most intriguing aspect is that the natural disasters expansion enables players to determine whether their city can withstand an earthquake or tsunami. Released in 2015, the simulator has allowed players to explore numerous safety measures and identify the most effective strategies. One such strategy involved the construction of flood walls in coastal regions. Gamers simulated a catastrophic tsunami both without these protective structures and with them. Unsurprisingly, the outcomes in the latter scenario were significantly less disastrous. The flood walls successfully held back the water and partially mitigated its impact on the area. Consequently, players reinforced these walls with 3 canals, resulting in a highly effective combination. The water was successfully prevented from reaching the city. Japanese officials regarded such structures as components of a tsunami defense system known as the Orange Line. However, constructing such infrastructure would require billions of dollars and necessitate meticulous planning and robust construction. Thus, flood walls can only offer limited protection to virtual cities. Furthermore, the wall and canal system within the simulator occupied considerable space, which was made available by the removal of a highway. This is not a feasible action in reality. Additionally, coastal areas of cities are among the most sought-after destinations for tourism and leisure, making it unlikely that authorities would permit the isolation of these regions with such structures. This is not the only exemplary tsunami defense plan that has remained unrealized. Another notable instance was an entirely serendipitous discovery made in India. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami uncovered a factor that somewhat diminished the wave's intensity. This factor was the presence of mangrove swamps. These swamps constitute a complete ecosystem comprised of shrubs and trees that thrive in saltwater. Their roots are submerged rather than anchored in soil. Additionally, they play a crucial role in safeguarding coastlines from erosion, purifying water and soil, and aiding in the preservation of biodiversity. However, the most significant aspect is that the tsunami wave encountered considerably more resistance in areas where mangrove swamps existed, in contrast to open beaches that experienced the greatest devastation. If the governments of countries bordering the ocean were to mandate the planting of mangroves along coastal waters, the height of tidal waves during a tsunami could potentially be reduced by approximately 2/3. Nevertheless, the challenge remains that any coastline can serve as a potential beach and, consequently, a tourist destination. How can tourists sunbathe and swim in mangrove swamps? Therefore, there is no need to be overly concerned about your seaside vacation. Yet, the future remains uncertain. It has become evident that there are no foolproof measures against a tsunami, even in Japan. So, what should you do if you find yourself in a vulnerable situation? Rely solely on yourself.